Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks figure out a way to win in Camp Randall Stadium Saturday night against Wisconsin. It clearly was not the best game Oregon has played, specifically on the offensive side of the football. We talked about this Sunday morning. I don't really love how I talked about this football game. So if the Oregon Duck fans give me an opportunity to talk about this game again with a little bit more like kind of like some planned out thoughts, I think I want to talk in a little bit of a different light in terms of how that football game went. We hopped on Sunday morning and we talked about the struggles of this Oregon offense, which certainly were present. You only scored 16 points. You only had 350 total yards. I mean, that's good for some teams. That's not good for the Oregon offense. I think we all know that. The standard's a little bit higher. With all the struggles that we saw from the Oregon offense, it kind of overshadowed what might be the best defensive performance we've seen from Oregon all season Saturday night in Madison, Wisconsin. So we're going to talk about the Oregon offense. We're going to talk about what we think can kind of get better as you go into the most important stretch of this Oregon season. But I also want to kind of highlight the defense a little bit more in terms of this defense is turning into one of the better units that we see in all of the country, specifically on this defensive line. Last year in 2023, I felt like this Oregon team fell short of their goals in 2023 because they didn't have game records on the defensive line. They have those game records in the defensive line. And I think even more importantly, that back end of this Oregon defense, that secondary, it is very legit. And so you look at this Oregon game and you come out of it, yeah, we can talk about the offense and we're going to talk about how it can improve. Do not overlook how dominant this defensive performance was on the road in Madison, Wisconsin. And again, I think a lot of people kind of started to realize that 8 straight conference games, 3 in the last 5 that were cross-country road trips. You're not going to see a college football team play great football every single week. It's point to me a single college football team that has played good every single week. You can't. Now, the important part is when you're not playing your best football, can you figure out ways to win games? Oregon was able to do that in a place to play, Camp Randall Stadium. That is one of the hardest places to play in the Big Ten. And when you have that number one next to your name, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Like that's a Wisconsin team that, has been good for some games, has not been so good for some games, but you kind of know when you're coming to town and you got that number one next to your name and you're the Oregon Ducks with Dan Lanning coaching your team, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Wisconsin played a really good football game specifically on defense as well. Now I want to get into a few notes now before we do, and as always, to the Oregon fans, y'all know my appreciation for this fan base has been a lot. It's this is a team I love talking about. The amount of support the Oregon Duck fans continue to show, it continues to be amazing. Appreciate you guys more than y'all know. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, 72 hours removed, would love to hear your thoughts, opinions on this football game as well. And without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with this Oregon offense. And again, I think the conversation is continue to be situated with how can this Oregon team become the best version of the Oregon Ducks going into the postseason? Yeah, we want to finish 12-0, but I think what's more important for Dan Lanning is winning a Big Ten championship, winning a national championship. And I think the whole emphasis is, hey, how do we get to be playing our best football come the month of December? I think the first thing that kind of stood out to me was the play calling kind of seemed a little vanilla. We're used to seeing this Oregon offense really get their playmakers in space, get a lot of yards after the catch. You just didn't really see a ton of creativity from Will Stein in this Oregon offense. And that might just be by design. Like, hey, we got some plays, we got some packages that we really like that we're probably saving for the college football playoffs or that Big Ten championship game. You might have seen that a little bit by design, but we're kind of used to seeing Oregon really do a good job of scheming their players open and getting a lot of space within this Oregon offense. You only had 100 yards after the catch created, which it's a very low number. We're kind of used to seeing that get closer to 200, 220. And so the play calling seemed a little vanilla. They went to a lot of the same concepts a lot. And I think secondly, you kind of got to give Wisconsin secondary their flowers. So it's a really good Wisconsin secondary that plays very disciplined zone coverage. They don't give you a lot of throwing windows, and they have the dudes to play man coverage as well. I was surprised that Will Stein and this Oregon offense did not try to run the football more. I think what makes this Oregon offense so hard to deal with at times is that it's a multidimensional offense. If you have a really good secondary, but not so good of a front seven, we can run the football on you. And if you're vice versa that and say you got a really good front seven, but not so good of a secondary, we can kind of stretch it through the air. Because this Oregon team can get it done both ways, it makes it very hard to deal with. We talked about it heading in. This Wisconsin secondary is very good. The front seven's not, specifically stopping the run. Oregon came out in the first half and was kind of trying to throw the football all around the yard. I'm not sure if that was Will Stein, Dan Lanning trying to send a message that we can throw on anybody in the country, but they struggled a little bit early. In the second half, it was almost like that flip switch and it's like, hey, we ain't playing around anymore. We're going to run the football. And you started to run the football really well. Now, the box score might not reflect how effective I think this run game was. Jordan James averaged, what, 5 yards per carry? He averaged 5 yards per carry with his longest run being 14 yards. From a down to down basis, Oregon was kind of chunking this Wisconsin team on the ground. And the yards per carry number for Jordan James was a little bit lower because he didn't really hit that 20 plus yard kind of home run hit that we see Jordan James kind of hit sometimes. And we kind of know Jordan James a little bit more of a downfield or kind of a, I wouldn't say bruising running back, but he ain't Bucky Irving in terms of making people miss in space and having that straight line speed to hit the home run play, but I think he can do it. I just think that you didn't find one of those plays against Wisconsin. And you give a lot of credit to the Wisconsin secondary and linebackers who I thought made some really good open field tackles. I thought Oregon ran the football better than what the box score says. And I was kind of surprised that they didn't start running the football a little bit earlier because once they did, they kind of just squeezed the life out of this Wisconsin team. So it seemed a little vanilla with the play calling. I was surprised they didn't try to run the football a little bit more effectively. Now, I think the second thing in the offensive line performance kind of reminded me of what we saw week 1 and week 2 with Idaho and Boise State. And what did we say about that offensive line performance? It just didn't seem like the unit was gelled all that much. That happens when you don't have a guy like Marcus Harper in the lineup. Marcus Harper's not the best offensive lineman for the Oregon Ducks, but he's probably the glue of the Oregon offense of line. You take a look at Marcus Harper, how much he's played. You saw Oregon specifically on the inside, maybe kind of a little slow, a little sloppy in terms of picking up some late blitzes, in terms of picking up some stunts and games on the inside. Very similar way I kind of feel like it was when they were trying to figure out that combination early in the season as well before Nashad really took over that guard spot. I'm not concerned about the offensive line. You saw Johnny and Josh Connerly have a few, one-on-ones they lost on the at the tackle spot that you don't normally see as well. So I think the offensive line just didn't play their best football. And I think that's okay. And I think finally, you just can't deny that this offense, it misses Tez Johnson. I think for the good news for Oregon fans, he just posted on Instagram this morning, he's back. That's the Instagram story. I'm not reporting that. That's just what he posted, which I think means Tez Johnson's coming back soon for this Oregon offense, which is huge. This is really why I think Oregon misses Tez Johnson. One, he's just one of the best wide receivers in the country. I think he's a top 5, maybe even top 3 wide receiver, but more importantly, he is Dylan Gabriel's guy. And so when you lose a guy like Tez Johnson, it's not just we're going to replace him. That's just not how it works when you're dealing with some of the best players in the sport of college football. And I think secondly, they kind of have Evan Stewart replacing some of the route concepts that Tez Johnson used to run. And then when you replace Evan Stewart with Tez, you don't really have that guy that can work vertically down the field. When they went to Evan Stewart vertically down the field, I think they took 2 shots to Evan Stewart. One was completed for 40 yards, got you inside the red zone. And so it's kind of a double whammy where you don't have Tez Johnson, but then you replace Evan Stewart for Tez Johnson kind of in this offense, and then you miss out on the Evan Stewart working vertically down the field, giving you some of those explosive plays. I think at the end of the day, it's just this Oregon offense has plenty of weapons, and we've seen that. But when you lose your number 1 wide receiver, you're not going to just skip a beat. If Tez Johnson was just an average wide receiver, maybe you would skip a beat. You wouldn't skip a beat. But when you're talking about one of the best wide receivers in the country, you're going to miss him when he's not on the football field. The main event, the thing that I want to talk about more, is this a top 5 defense in the country? And I think what's so special about it is you didn't even have Jordan Burch playing in this football game. Where did Oregon probably fall short last year was having difference makers on the defensive line. Derek Carmen has been that guy. We've talked extensively about Derek Carmen. Jamari Caldwell played by far his best game in an Oregon uniform. If you get Derek Carmen and Jamari Caldwell playing as legitimate difference makers on the inside of the defensive line, this Oregon offense becomes so hard to deal with because you got two guys that can create negative plays on the inside. You got two edge rushers, and Mateo Yu and Tatum, although are young, only second year players, are becoming better pass rushers, but are hammers against the run. And so you look at the combination for this Oregon offense and say, one, you stop the run on first and second down, and then you got just difference makers all along the defensive line that can rush the passer. This becomes a defense that's so difficult to deal with. And so Jamari Caldwell playing like that, I think, is a massive storyline for Oregon going into the postseason. And I think, secondly, you kind of have what you have behind is a really good secondary. You look at Wisconsin, 96 passing yards in this football game, 43 of them came on one play. You take out that one play, they threw for less than 50. That was a textbook performance by this Oregon secondary, and you're seeing everybody just play really good football. We kind of know what we have with Jabbar. Brandon Johnson's playing excellent at that nickel spot, and then you have a pass rush that is really disruptive. Again, I think the talking point coming out of that game was the struggles for this Oregon offense. What I think the talking point should be is how good this defense is starting to play down the stretch, specifically a guy like Jamari Caldwell on the inside. It felt like they didn't have difference makers in 2023. They were solid on the defensive line, but they didn't look like Georgia on the defensive line. They look like one of the best line of scrimmage defensive lines that you see in the country. Massive storyline for Oregon going into the postseason play. Coming out of the bye week, Washington Huskies, your last game going into the Big Ten championship. I would expect to see a much better performance against Washington, and I would expect to see this Oregon team really peak when it matters most. I think that's what Dan Lanning cares most about. There's a lot of other storylines, undefeated season, Dylan Gabriel Heisman. I don't think anybody in that locker room cares about anything besides winning a national championship and playing their best football when it matters most. Figuring out a way to win is part of the game. A lot of positive takeaways too, specifically what this defense is doing. 13 points. Wisconsin averaged 3.6 yards per play. Incredible number for Oregon's defense. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. All the support means the world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.